Back on One-on-One, New York's longest running sports call-in show. Jimmy Sullivan, Dylan Balsamo with you, taking you up until 2 a.m. 90.7 FM, Facebook, and YouTube. Andrew Posadas is going to join us for the headlines and other fun along the way. And Dylan, I've been at hosting One-on-One for a while, as have you, as have Andrew. And as you well know, there are some weeks you do this show and you think, gosh, how am I going to fill 3 hours? What are we going to talk about today? There are some weeks you do this show and you look at the 3 hours and you say, I wish I had 4. This is one of those weeks. We start with the New York Mets, who have had about 4 hours of news dating back to the last show we did last Saturday night. Just a quick recap through what has happened for the Mets this week, by the way. And we'll call this As the Mets Turn. So on Saturday night, after we had recorded last week's episode of One-on-One, they beat the Philadelphia Phillies. Michael Conforto, a late home run. They win that game. And after the game, Pete Alonso and Michael Conforto, namely, gave a lot of credit to a new mental skills coach that the Mets had hired. A guy by the name of Donnie. Now, they asked Pete Alonso, what's Donnie's last name? He had a little bit of a hard time with that one. They came up with Donnie Stevenson. Okay, there's no chance Donnie Stevenson's real, by the way. But Donnie Stevenson. So we're going with Donnie Stevenson. Sunday night, 17 hits against the Phillies. They win that game 8-7. They get a little help from the right field wall railing in Philadelphia to win that game. Once again, Pete Alonso credits Donnie Stevenson, telling them to go in the cage, rip some heaters. On Monday night, they get out to the lead against St. Louis. They lose 6-5. And afterwards, the Mets fired their real hitting coaches, Chili Davis, the lead hitting coach, Tom Slater, the assistant hitting coach. And they bring up a new hitting coach named Hugh Quattlebaum from their minor league system. So he's the new hitting coach now. So that's Monday. Wednesday, they split a doubleheader. Francisco Lindor's slump continues. It's becoming a capital T thing. Thursday afternoon, they beat St. Louis. Marcus Stroman, no, not Marcus Stroman, Taijuan Walker, I beg your pardon there. Pitches a gem, only gives up 1 run. Excellent game from him. Mets leave 17 on base in that game, but they still win because Taijuan Walker was awesome. And then we have Friday night, and we already went through Friday night. That was a lot. A Mets news cycle could really age you, and that's what we have seen this week. But Dylan, I want to start with the firings of Chili Davis and Tom Slater. This is a very big story. It's earlier in the week, but it's huge news. The Mets come up with a fake hitting coach. They fire their real hitting coach. Dylan, I'm curious your reaction to that after what had transpired over the weekend when they had started to hit and didn't give credit to their real hitting coach, instead inventing a mythical character named Donnie Stevenson.
Well, in terms of whether or not Chili Davis needed to go and his assistant Slater, I really don't know how I feel. I've thought about it all week, and I really just I keep going back and forth on things. And it seems like the Mets players weren't a huge fan of the firings either. It's confusing. And here's the thing: you like to think the Donnie Stevenson running gag, because that's really what it is. It's a Muppet Show level running gag. You like to think that has nothing to do with the firing of these 2 Mets employees, but it might. And if it does, that's really, quite frankly, unsettling. There's a lot we don't know about the situation. The Mets organization has said, this is just something that needed to happen. This is just, things needed to be rearranged. And, there's an argument to be made for that, of course. But in the event that Donnie Stevenson has replaced Chili Davis and his team of hitting coaches, is something that really unsettles me, quite frankly.
Well, people were joking on Twitter that when they heard that Hugh Quattlebaum was the new coach, there was a segment of people who was saying that Donnie Stevenson sounds more legit than Hugh Quattlebaum. I mean,
Well,
I don't agree with that, but people were saying that.
So here's the thing. First off, I thought this as soon as they brought him up. Q Quattlebaum is a wonderful name. I love it very much. I think it's so good you couldn't make it up. Donnie Stevenson sounds like you made it up.
Yeah. I will say also, I've been resisting the urge to call him Q Hoddlebomb, like by accident, because it's a bit of a mouthful. I did find it interesting. I was watching Pete Alonso's presser on Tuesday, after they let go of Chili Davis, and he was very emotional about it. He was talking about how he broke down in his locker. He felt, he didn't say this, but it was sort of implied that he felt like, in a way, they had failed Chili Davis by the way they had played in the first month or so of the season. And I find that interesting in the same context that Pete Alonso basically created this fake hitting coach. Like, he was the guy who got up there. I think he referenced Donnie Stevenson like 12 times in his press conference. And look, I am well aware that this is an evidently absurd conversation that we're having here, but it does have to be had, because you have a guy in Pete Alonso who is already, even though he's only in year 3, a very vocal leader in that clubhouse, both in that room, in the front-facing sense of the job, talking to the media. And, he was like very much in on it. And, when they scored the 5 runs on Saturday in Philly, and then they scored the 8 runs on Sunday on Philly, I didn't hear Chili Davis's name once. And unfortunately, I mean, we could talk about how it's a bad look, and if that contributed to Chili Davis's firing, yeah, it is a bad look. But at the same time, if your players are creating an imaginary hitting coach, if they are going to great lengths to talk about this fake person, and I can't imagine Donnie Stevenson is real, but if they're doing that, as absurd as I know I'm sounding right now, if they're doing that, that kind of tells you what you need to know about the real hitting coach and Chili Davis and the direction this offense was headed. And I think, for me at least, that explains the move more than enough. Timing of it's weird. The way they went about it was wrong, because the players didn't find out until it was sent out through the media, basically. But the actual decision itself, to me, when I see that, it means it makes perfect sense.
Yeah. And you're certainly not wrong in that sense, Jimmy. It's incredibly unfortunate. Something I don't understand is there's a lot of people who make the argument that, like, who blame the Donnie Stevenson practical joke, if you will, which, we're all pretty sure it's just Pete Alonso and a mustache and a big wig. It would be very surprising if it was not that at this point. If that's not,
I'm thinking like who's the guy from Eastbound and Down? What was his name? Kenny Powers, I think that was his name. Yeah.
So So it's interesting, because there's a lot of people who are opposed to Donnie Stevenson, who said, yeah, what happened was they were like, they made up this fictional guy. And the Mets organization was like, well, why are we paying this real guy? Let's let go of him. But the guy you bring in is going to be the same thing anyway. Like, the fictional character still exists whether or not you fire the current hitting coach. And every team has a month of the season where they're just not producing offensively. The Mets typically have many months of the season where they don't do that. But, a good team, like the Mets are this year, are going to have a month of the year. The Major League season is about a month too long for an assortment of reasons, but that's one of them. There's going to be a month of the year where you're just not going to hit. The Mets season just so happened to start with that this year, unfortunately.
Yeah. Let's get Andrew. I'd love to curious what you have to.
Yeah, because initially, fellas, I was just here so I wouldn't get fined. I was going to keep my mouth shut. But, I mean, this is just too tasty to not give my 2 cents. Jimmy, I get renegade vibes from this Mets team this season. It's like, the jig is up, the news is out, they find, like, that's the type of vibe I'm getting from this team, where they're just so unapologetic. They go about their business how they want. And it's almost like, maybe it's a result of Steve Cohen and having him come in, and where the players are like, well, Uncle Steve, he wants us to win by any means necessary. We can do whatever we want. It's almost like the substitute teacher coming in, and you just know, all right, we can get away with a little bit more than we could when the big bad Wilpons were up there, owning the team. But it's so interesting. There's not a boring sub story with this team. Hugh Quattlebaum, that sounds like, I don't know if you guys ever seen the movie The League of Extraordinary Men. Sean Connery, he plays a guy by the name of Alan Quatermain. So it's like, what are we doing here? This is like the biggest catfish in Major League Baseball history, Jimmy. And the crazy part is they're in second place in the National League East. They're a few games away from Philly. They're playing, I think Philly's won 5 straight. But even with this, with Lindor batting under 200, McNeil, I think, is at like 236 right now. Well, with everyone struggling and trying to find their footing, they're still in second place. And it's still so early in the season that a month or two from now, the biggest story won't be any rodents. It's going to be the Mets are on fire and they're in first in the NL East. And how far can this team go? So right now, this is just, this is a beat writer's dream, right?
Oh, yeah. The content is unbelievable. It's tremendous stuff. I will say this, too, and you bring up a good point about the Mets. Like, they haven't hit some of their offensive numbers until this week. They were down there with like the Detroit Tigers, and we're sitting here talking about them. They're a game over 500. Their front 3 guys, DeGrom, Stroman, and Walker, have a sub-2 ERA. They've been phenomenal, and they're getting Noah Syndergaard, Carlos Carrasco, Seth Lugo, all back in the coming weeks. Well, allegedly, and you know how these things tend to go with the Mets, but nonetheless, like we're having this conversation about a team that could still very much, go to the playoffs. And you referenced it. Not only Lindor, really they're 2 high-profile offensive signings. Francisco Lindor, James McCann, have both been, frankly, pretty bad from the plate. And they've been struggling mightily. McCann got booed last night. He got pulled in the 5th in a double switch. Like, there's a lot has gone wrong for the Mets here, and yet they're a game over 500. But it's going to be a weird year. Like, their offense could get hot, and then their pitching could regress. It's going to be like a whack-a-mole type season almost, where maybe not everything gets right at any one given time, but they could still win this division. And I look at the move they made earlier this week with the hitting coaches. Look, the organization obviously changed hands in the offseason. Chili Davis, very much not the new regime's guy. Zach Scott, the GM, was in Boston with Chili Davis, so he knows that Chili Davis is an old school guy. What I just don't understand, and this is like a minor quibble, if he wasn't your guy, I don't know why they didn't just get rid of him in the offseason and let him try to find a job for this year. That's the only thing that I would contest. But look, like, this is a Mets team that is, all things considered, to be a game over 500 the way they've hit, that is fantastic. And I'm, if you just look at the back pages or just the sentiment around this team, it's almost like you wouldn't know that this team is a game above 500. And yet here we are. So I actually think there's reasons for optimism, believe it or not.
I don't disagree with that sentiment at all. There are certainly reasons for optimism. And, there's I think until this Mets franchise wins another World Series, the LOL Mets culture will continue. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
In the same way, I think we saw that with the Cubs in 2016. I'm not saying these are the 2016 Cubs. Maybe they are, maybe they're not. We just don't really know yet. But like you talked about, there's going to be I think whack-a-mole is like the perfect analogy, actually, for some things are going to click, other things just not at the same time. That's just how it's going to be. I think there's going to hit a point in August when there's going to be at least one point in the year where everything's going to click. And that is when you hope your team gets into the stride of things. But Andrew, that's still a ways away. And until then, you just got to figure out how to win ball games.
No, and I would say this. I think, a lot of traditionalists and purists, they think the Mets have made a mockery with the way they've created Donnie Stevenson, and now this raccoon thing, and Lindor and McNeil saying it's a possum, and kind of going with it and just elaborating on it and keeping and just sticking to the story when really everyone thinks it's baloney. But I would say this. I think for the Mets, ultimately their attitude, this sort of fervor that they're playing with, I think Mets fans are going to embrace it. That's what you want, right? I mean, guys are going to clash. There's a lot of moving parts, guys who have to get acclimated with others. Lindor and McNeil, particular, they're, playing right next to each other in the infield. There are going to be times where guys are going to be in disagreement and there's going to be, growing pains. So I think if you're a Mets fan, you want those things to occur, because at least it shows you that they're passionate. Guys are trying to work it out. You don't want it to be, Jimmy, where we're seeing like the Yankees earlier on, where it just looked like they were lifeless and not giving any effort, just running down to first base. So just seeing the fact that Lindor and McNeil, that they're getting into it, they're both trying to work it out, and guys are trying to help, moderate and help guys get that team chemistry, that rapport. I think it's going to help down the line. And it's something that I think Mets fans will really embrace and kind of take with them. I mean, New York, we're so gritty and grimy, and guys who are just, we want that in our players. And I think Mets fans are going to welcome that.
Yeah. And I think also, like, I'm good with passion. Jeff McNeil's a very passionate guy. I mean, Dylan and I were talking last night when there were no fans in the stands last year and you could hear everything. Jeff McNeil would ground out and he would say certain words going past first base loudly that you could hear that I'm not going to repeat. But he's a very passionate guy. Lindor is a very passionate guy. I don't want my shortstop punching my second baseman in the face, but to a certain extent, like, conflict does work. I don't want guys wandering through the motions. So the fact that they're working hard trying to fix it and occasionally butting heads doing so, to me, is not the end of the world, especially because by the end of it, it seemed like Lindor and McNeil had made up.